Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Miss Dove back there with her transparent eyelid is trying to get a freak on, so she might be in the microphone for quite a while, but she's sort of soothing. All right, folks. So many of you have been waiting for sort of a redo of the ISS, aka International Space Station episode. Next one we're going to do is a JPL, thanks to a listener who reminded me. You should focus on that for a whole episode. So, let's see here. I'll tell you what. When we talk about things like the moon missions, it's much easier to pick that apart, determine what is real, what is fake. And the International Space Station is not one of those things. And we'll get into it. So this idea of an International Space Station supposedly originated back in the 50s by one of the paperclip guys. And it wasn't von Braun. As you know, von Braun said, look, if you want to get to the moon, you got to build a space station. And once you get done with that, you got to ferry fuel up to the space station, meaning store fuel inside of it. And then you got to build a rocket that pushes a ship up there. Then that ship will detach from the rocket, dock at the space station, fill up with the fuel, and then drive straight to the moon. That was the plan. That's why von Braun did that on the Disney Channel in 56 or so. And Stanley Kubrick used that model, / Arthur C. Clarke used that model for the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. That was the way you did it. And then NASA looked at that plan and went, oh my God, that's like 100 years worth of work. We're not going to be able to do that. So we got a different idea. Magic. Special effects. Now, let me just take a step back from all this sort of space stuff and remind you of a financial reality. If you're a young whippersnapper, listen up, because this will change your life. We have things called savings accounts. And then we have things called annuities. And the difference is this. You put a bunch of money in a savings account, well, your bank's going to steal a bunch of money for service fees. Inflation's going to steal the value of the money, which is your government ripping you off. So a savings account is, in current day times, because we have been such cowards and allowed the world to be taken over by all these crazies, under the guise of not being crazy, which is hysterical. Savings accounts are the worst thing you could possibly have as the only way to store your money. You need to pop it out, put it into gold, pop it out, and do something else. I'm not a financial advisor, by the way. But annuity is an awesome thing. You own a bunch of homes that you rent to people. You own a hotel, which you have occupants for. Nothing's easy in life, okay? These things come with issues. You could have a dividend coming out of a company because you own a great company or a good piece of a company. That is your retirement mechanism because it generates cash. It doesn't just sit there as cash. Now, of course, it's terrifying to put your money in anything these days. So I sympathize if you're like, yeah, well, And then gold, you have to convert to money if you want to spend it. But gold's a great mechanism, in my opinion. I've done that myself at times. But why mention this little economic lesson? Because they knew when they did the moon missions, eventually it was going to catch up with them. They honestly did more moon missions than I would have ever thought they would have done now that I know the platform, which is 7 attempts, 6 successes. The third one was specifically designed to not work, to gain the attention of folks back to the missions, right? People started calling and complaining after the second launch. What's this crap doing on TV? I Love Lucy's getting pushed to the side. I don't want to see your moon crap anymore. So then Apollo 13 corrected that little complaint, and everybody loved it all the way to 17. Then the space shuttle comes around, which is a methodology of putting payloads in space, because the game moved from intercontinental ballistic missiles to owning space. Now, I'm sure that the second that Sputnik went up there and orbited, the plans for dominating space in terms of low orbit objects was definitely immediately conceived of. But without the moon missions being orchestrated and developing the ICBM backbone, you don't have a methodology to reliably, every single time you need to, put something in about 200-mile up orbit or more, geocentric about 22,000 miles. All right. But the space shuttle comes around. Space shuttle provides a mechanism to routinely spend hundreds of millions of dollars, routinely. Reusable object. The only thing that doesn't come back is the central tank. All kinds of plans were put together to use that tank for a bunch of stuff. Not a single plan ever went through, as far as I know. I mean, those tanks would have been amazing to put some sort of attachment mechanism together that's very aerodynamic, so when it launches, no big deal. But you have, dozens and dozens of these gigantic tanks out there. Imagine just clicking them together. Built, send some propulsion unit up there to keep them in orbit. And you could have built some gigantic thing up there. And then just once you get it all welded together, clicked together, and start penetrating, pre-made doors that are a little thinner or whatever. I mean, you could have made a pretty amazing globular thing up there in space. So in 1984, I should say by 1984, this concept of an international space station, a space station, it wasn't considered international until later. America wanted to create a space station. They put some designs together. Looked considerably different and measurably smaller. Essentially take out most of the European contribution, or Russian contribution, and a few of the European contributions, and you'd have about the size of the 84 design. But for some reason, and this almost baffles me, they canceled it. They didn't go along with it in 1984. But the concept had been, debuted, infected the minds. And so you had to wait 10 years for this thing to come back around. But in the meantime, the Russians were like, we'll be the first ones to do it. And they put the Mir up there. And the Mir, fairly impressive little design. You watched it crash in the South Park episode, which is where most people learned it existed. But now let's say that you wanted to build something, but you didn't have didn't have all the money you needed to do it. A good example of this is all the Disney parks. I don't know if you've ever been to a Disney park, but if you have, you'll notice that every major ride has a sponsor over the top. Energizer used to do all the space stuff. Mars Candy Bar Company used to do a couple of the rides. But everything had a sponsor because these rides cost a tremendous amount of money. Just here in Southern California, when they did the Radiator Springs expansion, which is the Pixar movie Cars being expanded into California Park, the expansion was over $1 billion of money. It's really enchanting as hell, and the ride at the end of the park where you're in the car is actually pretty cool. So, for 10 years, roughly, technically 11, a group of people are putting together the modules, putting together sort of like the basics of what this thing would need to be in order to accomplish anything. And then they go out and get partners in Europe, Japan, Canada, Russia, and they put this whole thing together on a paper. And then there's going to be 3 techniques of getting this thing into space. You're going to have the space shuttle, the Russian photon rocket, or proton rocket, is that what it's called? Yeah, proton rocket, and then the Soyuz, which is still used to this day. Now, I'm giving you the foundation because last episode I didn't. I just started talking about the things that are very, very suspect about this thing. So the way this thing comes together is that you have several modules going up that are all Russian and all being attached. They said there was over 1,000 hours of EVA, which means spacewalking work. They went up in about 6-month increments. You've got robotic arms from Canada again, which is what they contributed to the space shuttle program, apparently. Yeah, but Japanese module goes up towards the end there, and they've got their own little robot arm. There's this wild-ass robot that attaches to, in most cases, the arm. I've watched several documentaries about the various modules. We're not going to get into those because it's just a nerd fest, and other videos that do a much better job. But obviously, you know that there's areas that were supposed to have been habitat only, and then various science-oriented capsules. The outside was ingenious in that they built it in pieces that then would get you to the next stage. And then when the new pieces showed up, sometimes they take a piece and move it to the other side and expand it up. And so the vehicle would appear symmetrical. At the very, very end, it's symmetrical. It's obviously approximately the size of an American football field. Just recently, the thing comes to a close. And, what's strange is they're now talking about canceling the project. Apparently it has funding till 2025. You guys are seeing all these feeds. And this is where we're going to begin getting into the potential that this thing is not what they say it is, simply because the footage that we're getting from this object is, tremendously suspect, to say the least. Now, do I think we could put an object 250 miles up in the sky? Yeah, I do. Absolutely. And whatever your model of the Earth is, there's something for each model of the Earth that accounts for something being in orbit up. So you don't need to split hairs. The classic question about the ISS, and the very first one, and I have not been able to dismiss this because I was unable to find the footage of it, is that the initial construction of this monumental thing by man in space. Again, the Mir went first. Way back in the 60s, there was a module connection thing that happened, which is cool, supposedly. I don't believe it, but anyway. There's no footage of this thing being put together. No footage. And then you get all of a sudden breathtaking footage of this place from a camera that no one can seem to explain, as well as the camera in some of these shots looks like someone's hand holding it in space. Now, without a massive tether hooked to an astronaut in some suit, I wouldn't be as far away from this space station as this dude appears in these shots, because just one thing goes wrong and you'd be Frank in 2001: A Space Odyssey floating out to nowhere. So a giant portion of this gets put together, and again, where's the footage? Who would you be protecting from a national defense realm? Russia's involved in the project. America's involved in the project. Europe, Japan. Who's left? Who's left that you wouldn't film this because there's no threat? I mean, everybody knows how this thing's put together. They traded modules because they built a module for the ground and they built a module for space, and then they would, because the Russian ports are a little bit different, apparently, than our ports and Europe's ports. There's this little junction port. It's actually the most bizarre looking thing because it actually tilts down. Maybe there's more to that than I'm aware of. So they're involved. Everyone's involved. But yeah, no footage of it being built. That's suspect to me. It just is. Call me sensitive to history. But here's why this episode exists. Because 4 to 5 years ago, there was a gigantic explosion in people being very, very interested in this. And it is interesting how we all just sort of bump into a conspiracy. We do our research. Even if you think someone's blowing smoke in some of the videos, because they're trying to latch onto legitimate stuff or trying to disinfo the legitimate stuff. Even though you're sitting there going, okay, well, that's fake, but that's definitely real. Man, that means that what we're being told isn't true. There was this event, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where the space station went in front of the moon. And some friends of mine in LA who were special effects guys got on top of their building and hooked up a telescope and recorded it with a camera and managed to snap that shot, for it flowing in front of the moon. And 2 or 3 different places did it. So if you think it doesn't exist up there in space, I would challenge you to dispute how 3 or 4 of my friends got the shot. Now, it's only in front of the moon for a split second, so these folks had to hook it up to high-speed cameras, but that's exactly what they have. They have 60 frames per second 4K cameras because they're special effects homes that actually do the principal footage for various effects. So that's why these folks climbed on the roof and did that. Now, what's funny is one of my buddies, who's just a consummate liar, and he doesn't realize he is. It's funny. It's like he's kind of dopey now because he's really old, but he just lies through his teeth constantly. And we all just listen and, oh, yeah, okay. He's like, I bent down and I looked through it and I saw it. Well, obviously, it's moving too fast for him to bend down, look through, and see it, right? So that kind of stuff happens. The people want to be a part of something, so they just latch on to, well, me too, In the end, you kind of have about an 8-year-old inside of an older body, and they manage to keep that necessity to be in the in crowd. It's just a weird thing, man. But now the footage, which I'm going to show in this episode, which is going to make it take an extra day to edit, but that's going to be worth it. If you were in space, you would obviously be in a container that, because you are in a heliocentric model, you are falling around the ball of Earth. So it's just like if I threw a rock and you see it fall. Well, imagine if I threw it so far and so fast that before it fell to hit the ground, it actually exceeds the boundary of Earth, and so then it's falling, but then it's being grabbed by the ethereal winds, pushing on Earth from all sides, right? And it just keeps hanging onto the Earth the whole time until eventually those ethereal winds catch up, and it starts to burn up in the atmosphere, as we've seen many objects do, the mirror being one of them. So the space station is, roughly hovering about 250 miles. Its orbit diminishes, of course, and it has to be pushed back up. But we do all these videos, I say we as a world, where these astronauts are up there and they're talking to kids down on Earth. And they get recorded, and they get put into YouTube, and that's where we see these things. But they make gigantic mistakes. And proving that this place isn't what we think it is only really the beginning of the conversation, to be honest. And so we have to prove a couple of these things. One of the classic things they do to prove that they're in zero gravity is to do a front flip on camera. And so they do a front flip so they know where their head is. If you do a back flip, then you don't know where your head is. So if they do that, then they really feel safe. But one of the guys, there's 4 of them talking to some kids, right? So 2 in the front and 2 behind them. They stacked them like that. And they're, doing the floating thing like this, And then they do this forward flip. And this guy ends up getting himself caught on his David Copperfield harness. And these harnesses have been used way back in the 1800s when people wanted to fly and do Peter Pan type things. But he doesn't make it all the way around easily. So the guy next to him sort of helps him out and accidentally grabs the wire attached to his left hip. And the evidence of this is that the shirt that's underneath the wire pulls out in a triangle, proving that there was a harness there. It's brilliantly done. I mean, we could do real-time wire erasing at this point. Why do you think Photoshop offers you the ability to subtract someone out of a photo? Because that algorithm is ancient now. It's still used every day in Hollywood to remove wires if wires are necessary, which they are. Now, a lot of wires are the color of the green screens, but sometimes that's not possible. Another big one, and I sure hope I can find all this footage, and I might end up grabbing it from my old video if I can't find it. But there was a group of people. I think it was 2 guys and 1 girl. And the woman is over on the side flipping this little stuffed animal, proving that she's in zero gravity, right? They always have this weird thing where it's like, do something on camera that proves that you're in zero gravity. That's the funny thing. It seems suspicious. It seems just be on camera, would you? If you have a cool experiment, then do it. But if we're just trying to ask you about the space station, you don't need to be sitting there messing around. Because imagine you're watching some award ceremony and someone's going up there with the famous envelope and they're cracking it open and you're standing next to them, but you're flipping a toy. And over here, Watch me. Don't watch that person with the envelope. Watch me. It doesn't seem like a professional format to be distracting folks. But this chick winds up this toy on the wire that's holding it so much, it starts to slide out in a really weird angle, gaining its own physics. There's another shot where two guys are talking to the camera. There's a T-joint behind them. So between them is the tube goes down and then does a T. This dude flies by on a harness, not remotely concealing the fact that he's wearing a pretty heavy harness with black straps and stuff. Now, having been close to all kinds of wild productions in Hollywood myself and just studied the art itself, I know that is a on-earth harness for special effects. It just is. Now, these first examples I'm giving you are the ones that I think are legitimate. One other one internally, which may or may not be legitimate because we could create it here in our home, is the famous shot where the guy is trying to show you that you can slingshot yourself down the tube, just by hitting something and pulling on it. You just add velocity and pressure and force to yourself because you're in a weightless environment. There's nothing to slow you down. Again, just keep thinking about the moon mission, man. Nothing to slow you down. Nothing to slow you down. So then he grabs a door jamb to the right of our perspective, and he disappears into a tube that's off to the right. No big deal. Except somebody slowed it down and realized that the dude was going transparent before he went into the other realm. Like he's on a blue screen or something. Now, we could do that to anyone in the world. You could shoot a plate shot of get a hallway like that, and you put your camera on a tripod, so you lock it down. Your mom or dad walks down and turns into the bathroom. So then we bring that into Final Cut. We take part of the frame before they get there, and we put that off on its own layer. So when your mom or dad starts going into the kitchen or into the bathroom or whatever it is, you take that other plate and you put it on top of them, and you slowly fade it up from zero opacity, meaning totally transparent, to fully opaque, meaning you can't see through it. And you could create this little shot and then circulate it all over the world that your mom or dad is a ghost. So even though that might be a blatant situation, it may be a hoax. Brought in Bush Sr. in a wheelchair to give a tour of command center and what have you. It looked amazing. It looked just like Hollywood, let me tell you. But he was at Houston. Sorry, not Cape Canaveral. He's in Houston eventually. And so you see all these crazy monitors in the room where he's getting his tour of NASA Houston, right? And up on the screen is an astronaut on the space station playing with a ball. Except behind him is a blue screen with a white grid on it, which allows the camera to engage in what's called augmented reality algorithms. The grid is there as a bunch of markers so that if the camera starts to move, right, as long as that grid is relatively smooth, meaning no imperfections, the camera and the mathematics that are looking at the image can calculate the distortion so that if they want to put things in the environment with him, extra things that don't exist, it's very easy these days. I mean, who would have ever thought that deepfake would exist to the accuracy that it exists today, and that you could do it on your telephone or do it in Blender 3D or any product out there? It's very processor intensive, and there's a lot of issues with lighting and what have you, but it's not that hard. Around the time that Bush Sr. is pushed through this NASA center, a bunch of that type of footage was being broadcast to kids and all of us here on the ground. And so it appears to correlate with a lot of the stuff that we were seeing at the time. So that makes it suspect, right? Why would you ever bring virtual reality anything to the space station for any reason whatsoever? You'd have to explain it. Now, I bring up the augmented reality thing because there's a whole branch of assertions that these folks have engaged in tremendous augmented reality where, and this, for me, isn't as conclusive, but there's a famous video, and I was trying to remember the context of the video, but a guy has a microphone. Guys have watches and things, and these folks are probably Jeranism. They pick apart every little thing that's moving around, and every time there's a communication, what do I want to say, pipeline burp, meaning the bandwidth between the space station and Earth slops around, right? It's meaning the compression algorithm is trying to make up for missing pixels, meaning there's a bunch of juggling parts of the image moving around. But these dudes jump on it, see, man, it's augmented reality. And it's like, maybe it's just a bad compression thing. Like everybody who said that a pupil that turned into a slit due to compression algorithms in the early internet, they kept accusing everyone of being lizards, that they were losing their shape-changing capability. Here these people are, I mean, this has occurred to me since I last mentioned it. You have someone who's rested going on an interview for a television show, like some sort of Good Morning America, and of course the algorithm, the bandwidth is bad. The algorithm tries to compensate. So you're getting slit things where there's normally round pupils. But if you're talking about losing energy to hold your form, I assure you it would be, Nicki Minaj at the end of a 2-hour concert jumping around. That's where she's going to start losing her form and sprout whatever you think she's got underneath the hood there. It's not going to be some totally well-rested moment where she's looking great on TV. It's not going to happen that way if you just take that theory and use it against itself. For me, part of me is just feeling very fortunate that the lizard people thing went away, like the reptilian theory. If it's something there, man, people have done the worst job ever exposing it. Anyway, now then we go outside the space station for the other type of footage, the EVA footage. This is where you're outside, you're doing some exercises to make sure you know how to do it. Now, one thing I didn't know about the space station was that the robotic arm that Canada built actually has a mount at its base, and that mount can actually attach all over the space station. So the little hand can reach out and grab something holding itself in place. Then they can undo the base, move it to a new location, attach it, and then the arm can move around from that location. So it's almost like an inchworm moving around the space station. It's really brilliant. Then you have a bunch of extra modules that aren't encapsulated modules, but they're sort of like panels that have giant supply containers on them, meaning other bolts and containers and repair things. Who knows? Now, the other one that surprised me when I was reviewing the composition of the space station was that there's actually big thermal dissipation panels to supposedly exhaust the heat from the space station. I don't get that at all. You were sitting in a very terrifyingly cold location, a couple hundred degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. And so why would you need any assistance venting heat? Where is all this heat going to come from in the first place? I guess potentially they're talking about that subatomic layer of atoms that are up there that are moving so quickly that they rate them at these super hot temperatures of like 4,000 degrees Celsius and things. Perhaps that's what they're talking about. But then again, these dissipation panels, you would think if it was an all attacking problem, meaning the atmosphere up there is going to, by the law of the thermodynamics, the third law of thermodynamics, hot always attracts the cold. So every single thing up there should be getting bombarded with this super hot metal melting temperature. And so your dissipation panels would have to almost be like a sphere around the vehicle, it would seem, or at least distributed evenly on all modules. That's not the case. Still very interesting that that's something that's on there, supposedly, right? And it should be mentioned that the shape of the space station that was seen in the telescopes here in Los Angeles by independent people matches the shape of the object that's up there. But when they're out there messing around, there seems to be quite a few anomalies going on. And this is where we get into one of the first how did they do it conspiracies, which I think we need to safely separate in our mind the difference between what might be up there that has that shape and what might be down here that is being simulated to have that shape so that they can do whatever the hell they want. So it should also be mentioned that even though you see the space station in these telescope shots, if you wanted to create an illusion that actually happened, if you've ever known of, I'd say Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the quest for the Holy Grail, they look for Camelot, and when they get there, it's sure enough in this shot with this castle on a mountaintop, and then Terry Gilliam, who made the castle, looks at the camera and goes, "It's only a model." And what they do is this forced perspective thing, right? The miniature of the castle is much closer to the camera than you think, but shot in perspective with the right light, it looks like it's on top of the hill. So if you wanted to fake a space station flying by, I don't know exactly how you do this thing. You definitely need to make it haul ass, but you throw it much closer to the surface as a small object that then looks like it's doing its thing. Now imagine you've got in Los Alamos Labs or Area 51 or something, some really cool fast propulsion system, because I've seen some drones, man, within some of these laboratories on video that are unbelievable. I mean, they move extremely fast. They stop on a dime, they move. So imagine one of these things having some really cool propulsion system. It's going to go really quick, but it's where you expect to see it. They throw it maybe, I don't know, 80,000 feet up or something like that. Much closer. Completes the illusion. But nothing's really there. So that's one way we can dismiss that if we needed to. But the theory of how they're doing the outside shots is that they have a gigantic water tank. Not the training one that you're aware of, but a much bigger one. The training one's 6.5 million gallons, I think, which is just gigantic. If you watch the training footage, the only bubbles coming off anything are the actual divers that are in diving suits with tanks and the whole snorkel thing. The astronauts that are in the spacesuits that are doing some exercise, there's not a single bubble coming off these guys. That's impressive. So they have a little system on them. Now, I think their oxygen is also a supplemental oxygen wire tube. But it's painted white to look like everything else. It's off camera. But we think they might have a big giant screen that is projecting some image of Earth. The tank has got some very, very sanitized water. And there is a movement of water and objects, right? Water provides resistance. Depending on how fast you allow the camera to run, you could slow it down a little bit. How many of you saw Poltergeist from 1982? There is a scene where there's like a ghostly character. I'll put it in there. Put it in the video. And that was shot underwater. It was a ghost character that had really flowing clothing, and it was shot underwater. But then it was high-conned and overlaid on top of the principal footage, so it looked like a ghost. High-con just meaning whatever super bright's the only thing that survives the exposure change, and so then that bleeds on top of your photo that is of a normal hallway. Well, why did they do that? Because they wanted an angelic flowing of the clothing to just kind of flap in the wind, So when our astronauts want to be messing around, opening a bag with some instruments in it, and it's like moving around a little bit, it makes sense to the uneducated eye. The other one is what we call water bubbles. So the Chinese have their own thing going up in space. When they do their spacewalks, they're using the same technique, and they have blatant mistakes. So now imagine that you're going to pull this hoax the way I'm talking. You build this huge tank, you got all the lights, you have a complete replica of the space station underwater. Now just think about it. You got a football field sized object, so that tank's going to be gigantic. But 6.5 million, we double that to potentially 12 million gallons. You probably would have enough space. Now, for those of you worried about light refraction, we're definitely going to have to address that. Because if that's a screen, potentially any light that you see, if the water were to get dense enough and move around enough, you're going to get distortion in objects. You'd see that kind of sort of thing happen. So there's going to have to be a very stabilized flow of water. There's not going to be any jetties sitting on the side renewing that water. That water's going to have to be sterilized in an off-camera moment, then absolutely locked down from any circulation whatsoever to make sure it works right. If this hoaxy theory were to be true. But bubbles are seen in multiple shots. It's probably more difficult to find it in 2020, especially with massive censorship and video scraping. I'll do my best. The best one I saw was a Chinese one where it was most definitely a bubble on his blast shield, and it just hugged the contour of his blast shield and went up and then flew off. In the American ones, we don't see it as often, except we see renegade bubbles, which look like particles, okay, that are flying off in various directions. I have seen them look more stable, meaning they're not changing their shape that much. And I've seen others where the bubbles really kind of, they're very tiny. So you have to really have an astute eye on this thing. Other structural engineers have asked a very important question. Now, the space station is held together by this spine truss, which is not inhabited by anyone because it's much too small. But it's like a triangle truss, as from what I could gather from the images. And, way off on the external areas, you have the solar panels that go in both directions. And then in the center, perpendicular to the truss, you have all the modules hanging down there, with Russia on one end, Europe on the other, and Japan attached to the end of Europe's modules. Now, apparently there's 15 modules up there, and the goal was to have 20. Some of the modules over time have been deprecated because they were duplicates of other modules that other countries came up with, and some of them were just waiting for funding to get up there and get connected to the system. The idea that you would leave a rover on Mars and operate it for 20 years, and then the space station gets complete and you defund it in 2025, should tell you about how ludicrous this thing is. If it is ever defunded, it is because it has grown to be such a mechanical liability for the hoax side of things that they don't want it there anymore. There would be no reason to not continue to attach things to this until it is the thing in that Luc Besson movie, right, where it's this gigantic spaceship. That movie's named so horribly. Something of 1,000 cities or something. Valerian, something like that. What a bad name. Oh, my God. The movie's got so many cool things to it, too. But the other one are the astronauts. Now, when you go back inside and you go look at the promo reel that was invented, I think about 84. Probably somewhere between 84 and 94. I found a video, which was the promo reel, selling the whole concept to Congress and probably the other countries. When they showed the interior of this space station, it is generally the same exact shape and same exact color scheme on the wall, I noticed, because I then fast-forwarded to the one that they claim is the one. And it's the same thing, except those complaints that we had made in the first episode of this, that this place is a shithole. Sorry for the language. It is. It is crap everywhere, constantly. As if these astronauts are just incapable of being anything but feral. It's unbelievable. But the original design for that space station looks just like a Netflix space station in some sci-fi movie. It was clean, it was organized, and how they just simply said, oh yeah, let's just attach a laptop here, laptop there, laptop here. Yeah, I don't get it. The other big criticism is that they wear civilian clothing while they're up there. Big sweaters. They don't have any regiment for their hair. So like my hair, really long hair. I could just supposedly go all over the space station, floating around, whatever. My hair's coming off, because it does over time, right? And someone else is talking to someone else, da-da-ba-da-da-da-ba-da-da, what a worry. And all of a sudden, the hair goes in my mouth, which is just, even if it's your own hair, it's gross. But let alone someone else's hair going in your mouth, that's just not nice. Plus, hair always comes out of everyone's head constantly. That's just the process. You just grow it back faster than you lose it most of the time. And so you got little tiny hairs moving everywhere. Clarence Thomas, my God, imagine that guy up there. But all your little hairs that people aren't supposed to ever interact with, they're everywhere. Yeah. Hairs can also get into electronic components and create a short. They can. They carry electricity if you got enough going around. So, that doesn't make any sense to me. Big fibrous sweaters. Now, every single time you ever watch any space travel show, everybody on the ship is wearing a jumpsuit. Jumpsuits can be extremely comfortable. They're very protective. You could put different layers of protection on them. Big dune suit or something like that, So that seems completely suspect. The other thing is that when we see the females, and there's all kinds of videos there's the blonde that washed her hair. There's the brunette lady who will be in those group chats that they do up there. And it's painfully apparent that her hair has been hairsprayed up to be gigantic to create the effect for the little kitties that they're in zero gravity. At no point could it just be like my hair right now with perhaps just a few fibers, kind of floating a little bit. But overall, you don't want to look like a clown, do you? Do you really want to look like a clown? Seriously. Why do we have hairnets as mandatory, clothing at restaurants for the chefs, for the short order cooks that might have longer hair? Hell, even if they don't have longer hair, half the time they wear them because we don't want hair in our food. And that's in normal gravity, let alone this stuff floating around. So that's suspect. Now, they do have to live a long time up there. But again, do you need to make a fashion statement in space? Is your ego more important than a space mission being safe? I don't think so. Doesn't make any sense. They could make these jumpsuits for the girls differently than they make them for the boys. They could even have 2 or 3 different kinds per sex, just in case someone's morbidly obese and they want to actually pay the 2x price to push someone in space. Whatever. Make it comfortable for them. But make it controlled. You want to be in space, you either have to shave that head down or you're going to have to wear something over your head. Preferably, you're going to have short hair. Just sorry. We can't have this crap floating around, and the little bonnet you're going to wear on your head, it doesn't want to contain a gigantic, like a Gyna hairdo, right? Whoopi Goldberg on frickin' Star Trek. Because you're going to need to move around, right? What if you had an emergency? A fire. And here you have this gigantic hair. Then you're contributing like the burning bush to the whole puzzle. What if someone needs to come up behind you to assist you in doing something, but your hair is in their face? You're slowing down the process of a rescue. You're slowing down the process of accessing potentially another computer because your hair is right in their face. No way on Earth is NASA going to take those risks, in my opinion. They're just not going to do it. Not because somebody goes, it doesn't seem to bother anybody. Oh, okay. Well, we'll just wait till it bothers you. And then this multi-billion-dollar thing in space just, explodes. The space program gets halted for 5 years. Whatever. No one's going to take those risks. So now the other thing is sort of the funny joke of what the hell are they doing up there? All right, now, see, I had to put my hair up because an 80-degree warm front's coming in, and it's blowing the wind. See, I'm keeping the show on track by taking care of my floppy mess here. Now, as I mentioned in my some recent episodes towards the end of last season, a friend of mine went off on a journey to try and find, all the evidence of fakery on this space station. And one of them had the brunette lady doing a full tour of the entire capsule. And I would say apparently, if I remember right, the shot was fairly continuous. She is moving in all axis of movement, so X, Y, Z. Not seemingly having any issues. And then it came to my attention of some of the special effects that were actually in 2001 and a lot of more recent productions, but they're reusing the 2001 trick, which is when you want someone to float 100% in the center of a fuselage type capsule, right? One of these modules. What you do is you put the capsule on its side. So one of the sides is up and one of the sides is down. But then you take the video camera, which is your full perspective of reality, and you shoot the thing straight up. And so what ends up happening is these individuals fall into the capsule on a tether, which has got all kinds of pulleys and computer-controlled systems that know how much you weigh to the ounce, and it makes sure that you don't suffer any major adjustments in your speed to look like you're hanging on a wire. Your harness is really wrapped around your body underneath your clothing that you might have on. So other than a violent stop, it's not going to be a huge thing for you. But we know that when you're hanging, if you're not wearing a space helmet, which is usually what Hollywood puts you in the scenario of, you know that there's a stress on your face when you're looking down at a camera and you're actually upside down. Because all that blood rushes from your feet to your head. Every vein in your head starts popping out. So I can't say that I saw anything of that nature when this woman was doing the tour. Now, what's weird during this whole thing is that she takes you to the areas where experiments are being done, and it looks like an absolute joke. I have seen kids' science fairs and gymnasiums with more mechanical equipment doing more interesting things than any of the experiments I've ever seen in the space station. Almost like it's a party up there to just mess around. The other thing is, in your entire lifetime, what's ever come into your kitchen or your car or in your hospital that was figured out in space? Whatever experiments they've been doing up there, where's the results? Maybe you know, maybe there's something there. I don't know. There's another video which is very, very telling. And, you know, the thing is like once you have a smoking gun where you caught them lying, then you never can reset back to totally believing what's going on. And this one video, which I don't know if I can legally put it in this video, but it's a Russian guy, I think. He's doing a demo for his people. And he's showing how the bathroom, I think, worked. And there was a little nut that was on a panel. And he's trying to move this panel, and the nut fell real time on camera. You could hear it hit the ground and go tick-tick-tick-tick. And he's like, oh man, oh. And he looks at the camera like, uh-oh. Now, I think initially I just dropped a nut off of a screw, or off a fitting, and now I got to go find it, oopsie doopsie, because that's what you would do here on Earth. You know, let's say I had a car repair YouTube channel instead of this one, and I drop a screw, or I'm doing some electronics repair, and man, you drop that little nut down inside the computer, like, shit, All right. But I think the other thing was that he noticed eventually in microseconds that he just blew the illusion of being in 3D. He blew the illusion that he was in zero gravity. Now, how would they fake weightlessness on camera? Because they do these long interviews where they're kind of, bumping around and stuff. Well, we know we could create some exorcist beds where whatever they're actually sitting on something, and it's sort of, modulating everyone's butt. And so everyone's got the illusion. That's cool. The chick's got her hair sprayed up. The dudes maybe have some augmented reality object or the little fluffy thing on a string that you can't see. All right, you could do those. One of the big theories is that these modules have been specifically designed to fit inside the fuselage of a jumbo jet. And we have services that we know of called the Vomit Rocket Service, where they initially trained astronauts on these Vomit rockets. They still do. But you can buy a ticket on a Vomit rocket, and I'm not sure what the the overall altitude is. I've heard it's about a 60-second drop. Now, one in a matter of NASA and astronauts and this important endeavor could probably move that ship even further up so that maybe you get 2 minutes or whatever. But that this thing can drop down, everyone goes weightless, and then, your weightlessness is pretty steady. Now, when you see the videos of this, the pedestrians doing this, they're trying to move as much as they possibly can in the 60 seconds because they're never going to get a chance to do it again. Maybe do 4 or 5 drops in a day. But that's it. Once they're done, they probably will never buy another ticket. So they're going crazy all over the ship. And that's why, so don't get that difference between their recreational use of zero-G and someone trying to stage an event for the sake of validating the ISS. But there was an interesting video where there must have been, I think it was damn near everyone that was in the ISS at one point. It was like 6 to 8 guys. I don't know if any girls were there, probably. But they had this little microphone they're passing around, talking on, right? And they pass it around. Which in itself, doesn't that seem insane? You can put a microphone in a room like the one on this camera and everyone's going to have their voices heard. Haven't you done a conference call with people? Is there a super mic on your chest? No, you're just talking to your computer and it works fine. This is NASA. Okay. They can use microphones pretty good, right? But they're passing around this microphone, and here's what was happening in the video. You may have to go watch this yourself because I don't want to get the video struck out of existence for copyright reasons. When they pass the mic to the dudes in the center of this crowd, and then it's faded on, you would hear his voice and then maybe a little bit of background noise. Not too much. But when they pass the mic to a dude right on the edge of this capsule, and that dude talks, then all of a sudden you hear what sounds like jet engines. It's a wild rumbling noise. And so the question is why would that be? Now, NASA could make up 1,000 reasons. They could say, okay, the heating system went on. So that's what you're hearing. But then my heater never sounds like a jet engine. It just doesn't. But when they have to fake anything? When does the proof have to show up in terms of believable footage? Well, it would be an organized event where you're going to talk to people on Earth. That's really it. Because every other thing that we've talked about, where they're creating their own little videos and then broadcasting it down to Earth, those can be created in a studio at whatever time interval they want and send it down to you. The other thing that I want to mention before we go too much further, because I'll forget, is that depending on your intelligence, depending on how much anyone's ever tried to pull the wool over your eyes, which I don't even know what that means, but apparently it's bad. There's just something kind of built into these individuals. Again, what would an astronaut be in the modern age? It used to be that you had to be a Top Gun pilot. You were a Gus Grissom dude. You could watch him fly amazingly perfect in a plane, or you could watch him probably knock you out one punch at a bar. These are big dudes, all American guys, cowboys, and if you're not from America, you need to understand there's sort of a code of ethic that usually travels with these individuals. Save any threats to their lives, right? Obviously, they don't want to have a situation where they're constantly having to threaten the living crap out of all these astronauts just to have someone participate. Russia, not such a problem because they're all for country. The hoax would be, of course they do this for Mother Russia, it makes us look good. In America, all you got to do is find sociopathic nerds. Folks that have had a hard time, treated like crap, and now, just like Danny DeVito in the episode of Taxi, where he wants to get back at all of his friends at his class reunion, and he was afraid that becoming a cab drive dispatcher wasn't going to be good enough, he sends a buddy off to play him at the reunion. These dudes get to do the ultimate, go to space. We know the integrity of astronauts is not that great because we had one of them, a female, try to kill another female at a bar in Florida. just because of some infidelity thing. All right, that's pretty heavy duty, man. You cheated on me, I'm going to shoot you in the head. But there's just something about at least 50% of the guys I saw yesterday while I was reviewing a ton of videos. These guys are telling you all about it. You either have a goo-goo-eyed person who probably would believe anything, and then you have that dude who's just a squirmy, wormy dude. And there's plenty of them. But now, let's talk about the design of the International Space Station. I say that slowly so you'll remember this is supposed to be a capsulized station in space to study space. The most damning thing about this entire situation, for me, it is the smoking gun of all smoking guns, that this thing is not what they say it is. It may or may not be up there. Maybe they used a prop, and threw it by the moon. But let's just say something's up there. The only window out of this place, meant for observation, is pointed at Earth, not space. One would assume that there would also be, that you definitely won't want to look at Earth, for sure. But you'd also have another one on the opposite side. Remember, the Millennium Falcon? You could go down that tube, and there's a gun up there, and there's a gun down below, so you can shoot above and below the Millennium Falcon. That made sense, right? Come on, guys, just rip off from Star Wars. You love ripping off every other sci-fi movie that exists. But you got this astronaut playing, David Bowie on his guitar. I mean, it's great. They get recreation, man. You're up there going nuts in some cabin fever environment, so I understand recreation. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. But what's the other way, right? What's the other way? Well, the moon is right there, and apparently with no atmosphere, oxygenated atmosphere. Wouldn't that be an awesome thing? What if, just imagine, okay, let's just say this. This gives you the lunacy of this entire situation. Let's say we wake up one day and you look at your telephone, you're expecting a bunch of acidic politics, and you don't. You see every rag on Earth talking about a giant mothership that's landing on the moon, and everybody can see it. You can almost see it with your naked eye. You see this reflection up there, or at least with your naked eye. Guess who they can't call to get a good image of this thing? They can't call the International Space Station to get a picture into space because there ain't no windows up there pointing the other direction. I was hell-bent to find any evidence of a telescope on this thing. Oh, let's rewind here, right? You have supposedly, in 1993, I believe is the year, the Hubble telescope is launched into space. There's no record of it launching in the International Database of Objects in Space. The only thing that's in the database are space shuttle missions to fix the thing because it didn't work right. Can we borrow from our Mars mission thing? What's the Mars mission model, the business model? Pictures. They're selling you pictures, right? All right. So maybe those Hubble telescope images weren't ready. The SOFIA system wasn't ready. They couldn't find anything interesting to take a picture of with SOFIA. So then Hubble can't work. So create this contingency that, it had a mechanical problem. All right, guys. But imagine that. You couldn't use a space station to look at the moon. Why not launch some really cool, super versatile Hubble telescope upgrade into space, attach it to the top of the space station on some really cool swivel. And then you can control that thing in all degrees. I mean, just look at the B-17 bombers, or the B-52 bombers. They have that, that turret in the bottom, which is awesome. You saw it in the movie Heavy Metal. Let's get something going. The problem is every single time they commit to revealing something about space, then they have to get a group of individuals to render something in CG so that you can believe that this is actually working. Or They'd have to use the observatory in Germany, which happened to release the same footage of Jupiter that Sophia released, that then the Hubble telescope released, all on the same day. And that's when we found out the Hubble telescope was probably not up there and not what they say, because they've been faking it with the system here on Earth. So what is a space station? If it weren't real, okay, it might be real. I don't know why they're having such a problem traveling without harnesses. In my opinion, if I were working for NASA, I would have suggested the plan that says the following. We are going to wear harnesses on camera every single time we're on film. For the mere fact that it's a safety protocol for having more than 2 people in one space in a zero-G environment, we want everyone to stay in the same spot. So right there on the edge of the capsule, you just buckle in and you chain yourself to your partner next to you, and they buckle into the wall on the other side, and everybody's in place for the camera shoot. And these harnesses are in view. Now you can use the harnesses to create the fake zero-G environment, but you're also blowing it off that it's necessary. Now they do have these little sort of plates on the ground where you can stick your foot underneath this plate to hold you in place. Makes sense. Sounds good. They can also double as handles if you're moving through the capsule really fast. But now let's think about this whole idea of that fun little thing they do all the time where they go zooming through the capsule. What happens if you miss the handle? You're hauling ass. You're probably going 5 to 10 miles an hour, I'd say, on a good yank to go through one of these capsules. Obviously, you get good with it, get better with it over time. Remember, their place is a crap hole. There are laptops everywhere sticking out. There's just junk everywhere inside this thing. And you're going to pull yourself through this capsule at 10 miles an hour. What's going to stop you? Nothing. The atmosphere in there is very, very light. It is oxygenated as Earth is oxygenated. Supposedly, they didn't want a pure oxygenated environment. Apparently, their oxygen is generated through burning various elements and releasing oxygen into the system. Plus, they also metabolize all the CO2 that the astronauts exhale. In terms of energy, well, the solar panel should be able to handle it. Even just a nuclear module, a nuclear power plant module being up there would handle it really easily. But okay, so this guy's going to pull himself through, and just on that particular day, maybe he's had a little bit of vodka, and I don't know if they let him drink up there or not. But for whatever reason, he just makes a mistake. Someone moves a laptop that wasn't there, and so the dude's relying on the fact that this is an empty area that he can move through, but now some dude's bald head gets jammed into some part of a computer. He bumps his head. He totally misses the bar, and so he slams into the wall with his head at 10 miles an hour. Now you have a medical emergency. A medical emergency on a space station. All right, now what? What are you going to do? You realize the millions, the tens of millions, and the hundreds of millions of dollars it would take to get this guy out of some sort of brain swelling concussion that might kill him? The older you are, the longer it takes to heal. Now, these people are vetted for amazing physiques and what have you, but a bump on the head's a bump on the head, man. So that seems suspect. Another amazing spacewalk problem that I just learned yesterday, which, remember how I told you that there's this theory that it's a big water tank? Now, if you thought that sounded amazing, to the degree you think that sounds ridiculous, you're like, oh my God, this guy's a total moron. One of the most dangerous situations that occurred, I think it was a French dude, but this dude's doing a spacewalk. He's leaving the module, and he gets out there, and he starts to report that he has water coming inside of his spacesuit. Now, for some reason, they said some sort of bag. They just gloss over the fact it's some sort of bag in his suit that's full of enough water that this guy's helmet's starting to fill up with water, and the dude's starting to drown in space. And one of these guys made a joke. It wouldn't be funny how, if you died in space by drowning, it would be really strange, right? I think what happened was the seal on his suit broke, the environment started to leak in on his spacesuit, and he was drowning because that's the environment that he's in. We just blow this stuff off because we don't have a clue that water is being used as the medium to shoot all these outside shots. The other big one for a lot of you is that every time you see Earth in the shots from an EVA exercise, Earth is really super duper round, but they're only 250 miles up. So if you want to know how far they are off the Earth, take 250 and divide it by 7,900, and then move the decimal place 2 to the right. That's the percentage distance off the surface of the Earth that they are. They're barely off the surface of the Earth, which means it's going to be super flat. It'll just be a big disk, and it's not going to be super round because they're near the equator as they do this rotation. And it moves at 17,000 miles an hour, that number I always quote. Now, the interesting thing about the space station in terms of what is it really, let's say it was really there. I'm not convinced it's really there. But what if it was really there? Then what would it be used for? The most cynical idea I could possibly come up with is it's a little Epstein Island in space. That's why millionaires buy tickets to go up and visit the place. As far as a low-hanging idea, why they wouldn't really be there, why they would need to fake this rotating, doll, that doesn't make sense to me. Why would you have to fake anything? Why would a guy fly by on a harness? Why would the guy doing the flip have a harness on his clothes and they don't acknowledge that that's actually occurring? Why all this fakery? I can't figure it out unless the thing is simply not there. They did have something in the air that flew by the moon. My buddy's got shots of it. So if it's really there, or if it's not there, and this shot came through, then they figured out a way to move something extremely fast through space for a brief evening to convince everybody it was there. I don't think I have any problem with them figuring out how to do it, even if we can't quite put our finger on it. And I forgot to finish my point about the structural engineer. One of the structural engineers was doing some basic physics on what it would be like to create a transverse wave of movement of energy through the space station. What that means is somebody bumps into a wall, moves, stomps, whatever, and as soon as you hit a structure with force, you have transferred energy from your body into the structure. And then that energy will move through the structure, and to the degree the structure is grounded, it will cancel the wave, and you're good. That's why skyscrapers do really well in earthquakes and windy environments, because they can always ground themselves to the earth that they're pounded into. But when you're in space, you're not grounded to anything. So one of the guys asserted, and I'm not a structural engineer, so I do not know how to access this, any software or simulation. Maybe if some of you are, it'd be great to hear your take on this. But what they theorized was that this wave would simply just keep moving around the ship, and to the point it would start to augment with every other bump that's going on, compounding this wave to the point the ship would tear itself apart just by sheer movement. I don't know if I buy that. I can see where that could have legs, but I don't know. Now there have been, I should say, moments where anomalies occur where at one point the solar panels were being extended and re-extended or what have you, and it actually, in the extending sequence, ripped apart. Like two things got caught together, and when it moved, it ripped the solar panel a little bit. That was due to apparently nothing hitting it. But there was a point where they said that they thought that a space rock went through one side of the capsule, and they were losing pressure, and something was leaking, and supposedly they covered it with some tape, and then eventually did an EVA and patched it from the outside. The problem with that theory, that it's a rock going through the space station, is it only pierced one edge of one module. If a rock is traveling unrestricted in space and it made impact with the spaceship, it's going to penetrate all the way through in one vector. Go through one side and then through the other instantaneously. There shouldn't be a point where you have one hole in the capsule, because even if it went down the lengthwise, it would start ripping bodies apart and turning people inside out as it's going through, and then it'll pop out the other side. It's going so fast, it's like a rail gun. You've seen these ceramic pucks that are shot through, 1 foot of lead, and it turns the lead into liquid, and the puck is still going. It's worse than that in space. Remember the Sandra Bullock movie Gravity with George Clooney? What is the premise of that movie? Well, you got a space station in space, and a real meteor shower starts to come in and just rip this thing to shreds. Again, my physics teacher told me in high school that at any one moment in time, the Earth absorbs 100 million little tiny meteorites per minute. 100 million. Now, it's a big ball, man. It's huge. 100 million sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. But that space station being up there in any form since 1995 all the way till today should have suffered many of these penetrations. Once NASA figures out the frequency of these penetrations, sitting in space with a space shuttle or anything doesn't make any sense, because at any point in time, this thing should be shredded by a bunch of microscopic rocks, let alone a big one, like the one that flew in over Russia, blew out windows and stuff. Of course, it's important to mention that their defense minister said that that was a weapon of the Central Intelligence Committee, or Agency, and who knows. That footage is really strange, because someone did an analysis of that quote-unquote meteorite coming in over Russia, and if you watch the footage, someone slowed it down, and you will see, even though this thing's going Mach something or other, something else accelerates even faster behind it and hits that core. And as soon as that thing that was going faster hits the core, that's when you get the giant explosion where all the windows blew out and everybody freaked out. So I don't know if that's a weapon that the Russians had to knock this other thing out of the sky, or if it's a UFO protecting things. Don't know. They later said they found the core of that meteorite in some river, lake down the way. So I should say lake. But then that's it. It's like you don't hear anything else about it. And it's like, come on, guys. It's tantamount to recovering a UFO, and everyone gets to know that it was up there and it was recovered. And then that's it. You don't get to hear about it. I mean, that thing should be in a museum somewhere. Now, it's hard to sometimes sort out the fiction versus the fact when you have movies that set a precedence for what could happen, and then you try to apply a movie to reality, and then someone taps you on their shoulder and goes, dude, that's not even real. Superman flying backwards around the Earth and faster than speed light's not going to actually make him travel back in time. That was just a comic book. Relax. But again, using all of the knowledge that I have from school and books, they are always talking about these constant shower of microscopic particles and big little rocks, about the size of a marble, coming into Earth's atmosphere. Now, we do have the Van Allen belts, which will cook a lot of that stuff. But okay, so you start out with a Chevy-sized rock, and then it burns down to a baseball, and now it's coming at the space station. And again, there's a lot of space in space. Just look up, It's hard to coordinate in 3D space up there. So is the space station real, or is it fake? If it's fake, then the whole thing is just localized on Earth, and it's just a money laundering thing for all the countries involved. You tell every country, look, man, you're going to build this little module. You're going to allocate X number of millions of dollars towards this project to keep the module alive. It's your contribution. And you're going to put all that in your back pocket. You're going to send it to your friends. You're going to fund Black Ops things. So it's just this nice little layer of fiction that facilitates whatever the hell you want to do with your money. That makes sense. Now, I talked to Bart Sabrell during that interview, and if you guys remember it, I think it was season 3. His theory was that that there are several space stations up there, and that this is just a ruse for our brain to make us think that we're so, remedial. But what we really have up there is like an Armageddon kind of armada of space stations. Everyone's got one, and they're fighting space aliens, and they're traveling around, and they're flying the space shuttle like a F1 race car up there. I don't believe any of that at all. I think we are far less advanced in space travel than we think. I do believe that Star Wars stuff is up there. And for those of you on the fringe, where you think that the space itself doesn't exist, and you think it's a blanket, it's a shield, it's up there for maybe entertainment purposes, or it's the firmament dome or whatever, all those theories do not negate putting something up there that can go in a circle. If you're a flat earther, you believe the sun and the moon are floating on a buoyant layer of atmosphere. Well, just imagine them throwing it up there, same exact methodology, and so it's going in a circle around the disk. It doesn't prohibit things from occurring. But even in the heliocentric realm, there's plenty of questions left. So hopefully that gives you enough information to kind of ask questions. There are reels and reels of this footage that is definitely faked, for sure, of interviews with fake objects, harnesses everywhere. There are bubbles in space on space masks that just contour exactly the way a bubble would move up a surface. Again, if you have an object that is, a piece of dust on something and it kicks off, it's going to just go in that straight direction. Bubbles, though, will have its tension in the water, and it will tend to try to adhere to whatever surface is next to it. That's what we see. It might be very difficult for me to find that footage nowadays because, again, we've had several scrapes of all the videos. And, again, if you see a video, I will just tell you, go get if you want to grab evidence of things you see online, go get a product. I think it's called Wondershare. It's what I use on my computer to bring down my own videos. Once they're encoded in HD, I bring them down as SD and then upload them, or actually 4K to HD, and then I upload them to BitChute. Get that software. Once you have the URL of a video, you just paste it into that product. It's a beautiful interface. It converts videos, it does audio, it does everything. It's an amazing product. And it'll yank it down for you. It updates constantly because the way that they build the web pages changes, and so the way that they encode the videos changes, so they're always updating it to make sure that it downloads properly, and it hasn't let me down yet. But definitely get that product so you can grab all the videos, and then maybe there might be a point where I'm calling out to you guys to use your libraries to send them to me so I can make the best video that's out there. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. I'll make a short bumper today because it's hot as hell out here today. We have everything you need up there. Make sure you go up and join BitChute. It seems to be the solid replacement for YouTube without any censorship or upload limitations. I just want you to know that Gab.tv has a 1 gigabyte limit, even if you pay for the Pro service. And that's not enough to upload even a single video of Deep Thoughts. You'd have to watch it at a postage stamp size, and I simply won't do that. And I do not have the time to cut every video in half or into 3 pieces and say part 1, part 2, part 3. If any of you want to do that, you let me know. But anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.